The night was eerily quiet over the frozen fields of eastern Ukraine, a silence so thick it felt as though the world itself was holding its breath. But beneath the calm, beneath the blanket of snow and the deceptive stillness, history was about to be rewritten. For months, Russian commanders had clung to their last desperate weapon, a fleet of hidden tanks, concealed in forests, camouflaged under netting, buried deep inside old Soviet terror bunkers in Crimea and Donbas. These were the machines Moscow swore would turn the tide of the war. These were the iron beasts meant to intimidate the world, to prove that Russia's military might was unbroken. But what happens when betrayal comes not from the outside, but from within? As the first whispers spread across Ukraine's intelligence channels, a chilling truth emerged. Russian soldiers themselves were tipping off Ukraine. Coordinates, photos, secret routes. Everything was being leaked, quietly, methodically, almost surgically. These weren't just deserters or men afraid of the front lines. These were insiders, men once sworn to the Russian flag, now turning against it. And then, it happened. In the dead of night, as Russian convoys moved to relocate their hidden tanks, Ukraine unleashed precision strikes with HIMARS and drones. Explosions ripped through the darkness. Fireballs lit up the horizon. Entire bunkers collapsed. Steel twisted. Engines screamed as they were torn apart. The so-called hidden tanks that Putin once bragged about were no more than burning coffins. The betrayal cut deeper than any missile could, because in Moscow, panic set in. How could Ukraine have known the exact positions of these tanks? How could their strikes be so precise? The Kremlin's walls trembled with one horrifying possibility. Someone on the inside was leaking everything. But who? And why? The answers would shake Russia to its core. Imagine the scene. Sevastopol commanders screaming into broken radios, demanding updates that never came. Tank crews buried under rubble, their last moments filled with confusion and terror. And deep in the Kremlin, Putin staring at intelligence reports with cold fury, realizing that no matter how many tanks, how many rockets, how many soldiers he threw into Ukraine, the war was slipping through his fingers because betrayal was spreading like wildfire. Ordinary Russian soldiers, exhausted from lies and broken promises, were now becoming Ukraine's greatest weapon. Some called it treason, others called it survival. But one thing was clear, the myth of Russian invincibility had been shattered from within. And as dawn broke over Ukraine, the smoke of Russia's hidden tanks rose into the sky, a signal to the world that no secret could remain buried forever. This was no longer just a war fought with guns and missiles. This was a war of trust, a war of loyalty, a war where one whisper could destroy an empire.
But as the hours passed, it became clear, this was no ordinary strike. Ukrainian forces had precise coordinates. They knew exactly where Russia's hidden tanks were being kept. It wasn't random, it was deliberate. In Kyiv, Ukrainian intelligence sources quietly confirmed what many suspected. Russian soldiers themselves had tipped off Ukraine. Disillusioned, angry at their commanders, and desperate to survive, some soldiers secretly passed on the location of their own armored units. It was the ultimate betrayal, from within Russia's own army. When the explosions hit, panic rippled across the Russian ranks. Tank crews scrambled, commanders shouted orders, but it was too late. Fireballs erupted across the storage site. One by one, Russia's hidden tanks, long prepared for a summer offensive, were reduced to twisted metal. The betrayal spread fear inside the Kremlin. If Russian soldiers themselves could no longer be trusted, how could Putin fight this war? Whispers of mutiny, desertion, and sabotage echoed across the front lines. Even loyal officers now looked over their shoulders, wondering, who will betray us next? For Ukraine, this strike wasn't just about destroying machines of war. It was a message. Russia is crumbling from the inside, and the more Putin tried to hide it, the more the truth surfaced. His own army was turning against him. In Moscow, silence filled the Kremlin war room. Reports came in, satellite images confirmed the loss. Dozens of tanks gone, entire supply depots destroyed, and the worst part, the betrayal wasn't from drones or spies, it was from inside their own ranks. Putin's face darkened. He slammed his fist on the table, demanding answers. How could this happen? Who dared betray us? But even his closest generals avoided his eyes. They knew the truth. Morale was collapsing, and loyalty could no longer be guaranteed. Meanwhile, in the ruined storage site, Ukrainian drones circled above, recording every burning wreck. The footage spread across the internet within hours. For Russia, it was humiliation. For Ukraine, it was triumph. In villages across Ukraine, people cheered as the news spread, not just because the tanks were gone, but because it proved something greater. Russia's power wasn't unshakable. The empire of fear had cracks, and those cracks were widening. Inside Russia, ordinary citizens whispered in secret, "If our own soldiers are turning against Moscow, maybe this war can't be won." And in that moment, Putin realized the unthinkable. The greatest threat to his rule wasn't NATO, wasn't Ukraine. It was his own collapsing army. Night fell over Kyiv, but the fires in the distance still glowed like embers of resistance. Families huddled together, listening to the radio reports, their faces lit with cautious hope. For the first time in months, they felt the tide was turning. But in the Kremlin, the silence was deafening. Putin sat alone, staring at a map where red arrows no longer pushed forward, but collapsed inward. The weight of betrayal hung heavy in the air, an unspoken truth that his empire was rotting from within. And yet, behind the political games and shattered steel, one question remained. How many more lives would be lost before the final curtain of this war falls? Because wars are never won by machines or strategies alone. They are won, or lost, by people. By the courage to stand. By the fear to obey. And sometimes, by the quiet choice of one soldier, who decides he will no longer fight for a lie. The world watched in silence. Ukraine's fields burned, Russia's pride bled, and history itself was rewritten. Not in speeches, not in treaties, but in the fire of that single night. When a massive Russian assault group walked into a trap, and never walked out again.